Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Imagine a HOA you never joined declares your backyard community green space, installs trail markers, and then people start accusing you of harassing trail users for mowing your own lawn. It sounds too dumb to be real, until I checked the county records, and what I found made my stomach drop. I woke up to the sound of a mallet hitting a stake 15 feet from my bedroom window. At first, I thought maybe the utility company was doing some work, but it was 7 a.m. on a Saturday, which seemed odd. I grabbed my coffee and wandered to the back window to see what was going on. There were 4 people in bright yellow safety vests scattered across my back acre. 3 middle-aged women with clipboards and walkie-talkies, and 1 guy with a sledgehammer driving wooden stakes into my lawn. Each stake had a fancy wooden sign attached that read, "Nature Path, Community Trail System." I threw on some clothes and headed outside. The morning air was crisp, and I could hear the women discussing something about phase connectivity and property enhancement values. As I got closer, I noticed they had already installed about 6 stakes in a neat line that cut straight across my vegetable garden and continued toward my old tool shed. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice friendly. "What's going on here?" The woman who seemed to be in charge didn't even look up from her clipboard. She was probably in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of fake smile that screams middle management. "We're installing the community trail connection between the east and west sections of the neighborhood. It's part of our new initiative for community vibrancy and property value enhancement." "On my property?" I asked. She finally looked at me, and I could see the immediate dismissal in her eyes. "This is designated community green space, honey. You'll get the newsletter on Monday with all the details about the new amenities." "Actually, this is my private property," I said, gesturing toward my house. "I've lived here for 12 years, and this is definitely my land." The woman exchanged glances with her companions. One of them, a brunette with oversized sunglasses, whispered something that sounded like holdout property situation. The blonde woman turned back to me with that same condescending smile. "I think there might be some confusion about property lines. Everyone in this zip code is part of our community vision. The trail system benefits everyone, including you. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next board meeting." "I'm not part of your HOA," I said firmly. Her expression shifted slightly, like I had just told her the earth was flat. "That's not possible. This entire development operates under our community standards and guidelines." "Could I see the easement agreement for this trail?" I asked. She actually laughed. "Sweetheart, this is community land. You should check your bylaws instead of trying to obstruct community improvements." The guy with the mallet had stopped working and was now listening to our conversation. He seemed uncomfortable, probably sensing that something wasn't quite right about the situation. "I don't have bylaws because I'm not in your HOA, I repeated. "This house was built in 1987, and your development went up around me starting about 8 years ago." The blonde woman's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Well, that's simply not how community planning works. If you try to obstruct this trail project, we'll have to pursue enforcement actions. We have very clear policies about residents who attempt to block community improvements." "Enforcement actions? Like what?" "Fines, legal action if necessary. We don't take obstructionist behavior lightly." I stood there for a moment watching these people hammer stakes into my lawn while treating me like some confused tenant who didn't understand how things worked. The audacity was actually impressive. "I'm going to need you to stop what you're doing," I said calmly. "That's not going to happen," the blonde woman replied. "We have approval from the board, and this project is moving forward on schedule. You can file a complaint through proper channels if you have issues." The brunette woman stepped forward. "Maybe we should explain the benefits. The trail system will increase your property value significantly. Plus, you'll have access to our community amenities like the fitness stations and meditation areas." "What meditation areas?" "Oh, we're installing a community reflection bench right over there," she said, pointing to a spot about 20 feet from my back porch. "It's going to be beautiful, very zen." I felt my eye twitch slightly. "You're putting a public bench 20 feet from my house?" "Community bench," the blonde corrected, "for residents to enjoy nature and reflect on their connection to the community." The guy with the mallet cleared his throat. "Ladies, maybe we should double-check the property boundaries before we continue." The blonde woman shot him a look that could have melted steel. The boundaries were confirmed by our landscape planning committee. We don't need to second-guess approved community improvements. I decided this conversation wasn't going anywhere productive. I'm going to need to see some documentation before this goes any further. Documentation will be provided through proper HOA channels, she replied. If you're not familiar with community procedures, I suggest you review your homeowner information materials. For the last time, I'm not in your HOA. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned to her companions. Let's continue with the installation. Some people need time to adjust to community improvements. They went back to work as if I wasn't even there. The guy with the mallet looked apologetic, but kept driving stakes into my lawn. Within an hour, they had installed a complete line of trail markers that cut directly across my property, along with 2 trail information signs that provided a map of the entire community trail system. After they left, I stood in my backyard looking at this bizarre situation. Professional trail markers now bisected my vegetable garden, and according to their map, my property was officially designated as Community Green Space, Nature Trail Segment 7. I called my neighbor across the street, an older guy who'd lived in the area longer than anyone. He confirmed what I already knew. My house predated the entire development. The land had originally been part of a larger farm, and I'd bought the house when the farm was subdivided. The HOA development had been built on the surrounding farmland years later. They've been complaining about your property for years, he told me. Your tool shed and vegetable garden really bother them. They think it brings down the aesthetic of their community. It's not their community. I'm not even part of it. I know that, and you know that, but they seem to think they can expand their authority to include any property that affects their view. Monday morning brought exactly what the blonde woman had promised, a newsletter in my mailbox. It was a glossy, professionally printed document titled Community Connections, with a cover photo of a family walking on a scenic trail. The headline read, "New Trail System Connects East and West Community Phases." The article described the trail as a community-wide initiative to promote health, wellness, and neighborhood connectivity. It mentioned the generous cooperation of community members in designating green space for shared amenities. There was even a quote from someone called the Community Wellness Coordinator about how the trail would foster deeper connections between neighbors and nature. No mention of my property specifically, but there was a detailed map showing the trail route cutting straight through what was clearly my backyard. By Wednesday, the trail had apparently gone live. I was working in my home office when I heard voices outside. Looking out the window, I saw a group of joggers running single file across my lawn, following the trail markers. One of them stopped to read the information sign, then continued jogging toward my neighbor's fence. Over the next few days, the foot traffic increased steadily. Joggers, dog walkers, families with strollers, even a few cyclists who seemed confused about why the paved trail they'd expected was actually just grass with wooden markers. The dog situation became problematic quickly. People were letting their dogs run loose on what they believed was community property, and I'd find dog waste near my vegetable garden almost daily. When I approached one dog owner about cleaning up after their pet, they looked at me like I was crazy. "This is community space," the woman said, gesturing around my yard. "Dogs are allowed on community trails." "This is my private property," I explained. "No, it's not. This is clearly marked as community green space. See the signs? Those signs were put up without my permission." She stared at me suspiciously. "Are you some kind of community compliance officer? Because I have every right to be here with my dog." "I'm the homeowner." "That's impossible. Homeowners can't restrict access to community amenities." The conversation devolved from there, with the woman insisting that I was somehow impersonating a property owner to harass trail users. She actually threatened to report me to the HOA for harassment. Friday evening brought a new development. I came home from work to find that someone had installed a wooden bench about 20 feet from my back porch. It was a nice bench, actually. Heavy cedar construction with a small plaque that read Community Reflection Area, donated by the Neighborhood Wellness Initiative. I stood there staring at this bench on my property, trying to process the sheer audacity of the situation. Not only had they created a trail through my yard, they'd now installed furniture for people to sit and relax while enjoying my backyard. Saturday morning, I woke up to find an elderly couple sitting on the bench sharing coffee and watching the sunrise over my garden. They seemed pleasant enough, but they were having their morning coffee ritual 20 feet from my bedroom window, on my property, apparently believing they had every right to be there. When I approached them, they were actually friendly and chatty. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" the woman said. "This is such a peaceful spot for reflection." "It's lovely," I agreed. "But this is actually my private property." The man looked confused. "Private property? But this is the community reflection area. It's on all the maps." "Those maps are incorrect. This is my backyard." "That can't be right," the woman said. "The HOA wouldn't put community amenities on private property. That would be illegal." "I agree it would be illegal." "So you must be mistaken about the property lines," she concluded. "No, I'm not mistaken. I'm the homeowner." They exchanged glances, clearly not believing me. The man stood up and pointed toward my house. "If this is your house, then why would the community association put a trail and a reflection area in your yard?" "That's an excellent question." "It doesn't make sense," the woman added. "Community associations are very careful about property rights. They would never do something like that without proper authorization." "I would hope not." "Maybe you should contact the HOA to clarify the situation," the man suggested helpfully. "Maybe they should have contacted me before installing a trail through my yard." They seemed genuinely confused by my responses, as if the possibility that the HOA had made a mistake was simply incomprehensible to them. Eventually, they finished their coffee and continued their walk, but I could hear them discussing the strange encounter as they left. "He seemed to really believe it was his property," the woman was saying. "Some people get very territorial about community spaces," the man replied. "Maybe he lives in one of the houses that overlooks the area and feels possessive about it." The weekend brought heavier foot traffic. Families with children, groups of power walkers, even a few people who seemed to be treating the trail system like their personal outdoor gym. I watched from my kitchen window as people stretched against my tool shed, used my garden fence for balance during their exercises, and generally treated my entire backyard like a public park. One group of teenagers had discovered that my old oak tree was perfect for hanging their phones to record TikTok videos. They'd apparently designated it as an unofficial photo spot, and I'd see different groups throughout the day posing for pictures with the rustic community trail backdrop. Sunday afternoon, I was mowing my lawn when a woman in athletic wear approached me. "Excuse me," she said loudly over the sound of the mower. "You need to stop that." I turned off the mower. "Stop what?" "The mowing. People are trying to enjoy the nature trail, and that noise is disruptive to the community experience." "I'm mowing my lawn." "This isn't your lawn. This is community green space. You can't just start mowing community property without permission." "This is my property. I live right there." I pointed to my house. "That's ridiculous. Why would someone build a house next to community green space and then claim they own the green space?" "The house was here first. The HOA built around it." "That doesn't make any sense. Community associations don't work that way." "You're right. They don't." "So you admit you're wrong about owning this land?" "No, I'm saying community associations don't usually build around existing properties, but mine did." She stared at me for a moment, then pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the community management company. This is harassment of trail users." "Who are you calling it into?" "The HOA violation hotline. They take community disruption very seriously." I stood there holding my mower handle while this woman called in a complaint about me mowing my own lawn. She walked a few steps away but spoke loudly enough for me to hear her side of the conversation. "Yes, I'd like to report a violation. There's a man on the community trail claiming he owns community property and harassing people who are trying to use the trail facilities. He's mowing community green space without authorization and telling people they can't use the reflection area." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "No, I don't think he's a resident. He seems confused about property ownership. Yes, I think you should send someone out here. He's being very aggressive about people using the trail." After she hung up, she turned back to me with a satisfied expression. "Someone from community management will be out here within the hour to address this situation. I suggest you stop mowing and move along before they arrive. I'll be sure to stay here and talk to them." "Why would you stay? You're the one causing the problem." "Because this is my property and I'd like to speak with whoever thinks they have authority over my property." She shook her head like I was completely hopeless. Community associations have authority over community property. That's how it works. And this isn't community property. The signs say it is. The signs are wrong. The signs aren't wrong, you're wrong. We might have continued this circular conversation indefinitely, but she spotted another trail user approaching and went to warn them about the disruptive person claiming to own community property. I finished mowing my lawn, which apparently constituted ongoing harassment of trail users based on the dirty looks I received from several people who had gathered to watch the situation unfold. About an hour later, a pickup truck pulled into my driveway. Two men in polo shirts with Community Management Services logos got out and approached me. One was carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of expression that suggested he dealt with difficult residents on a regular basis. "Are you the individual who's been claiming ownership of the community trail area?" the clipboard man asked. "I'm the person who owns the property the trail was built on," I replied. "Sir, this is clearly designated community green space. The trail system was installed according to approved community plans, with proper authorization from the Homeowners Association Board." Authorized by whom? Exactly. The Community Board, as I just stated. And what authority does the Community Board have over my property? The same authority they have over all community property. Look, sir, I understand that some residents have concerns about new community amenities, but you can't simply declare that you own community facilities. I'm not declaring that I own community facilities. I'm stating that I own the property the facilities were built on. The second man stepped forward. "Can you provide documentation of this claimed ownership? Can you provide documentation of the community's ownership?" "We don't need to provide documentation. This is clearly designated community property. The trail markers, the reflection area, the informational signage, none of that would be installed on private property." "Why not?" "Because that would be illegal." "Yes, it would be." "So obviously this is community property, or the facilities wouldn't be here." That's circular reasoning. The clipboard man sighed like he was dealing with a particularly difficult child. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop disrupting trail users and allow community members to enjoy the amenities they pay for through their HOA fees." "Do I pay HOA fees?" "All residents pay HOA fees." "How would you know whether I pay HOA fees if you don't know whether I'm a resident?" "You're obviously a resident if you're living in the community." "But I'm not in the community, I'm surrounded by it." "That doesn't make any sense." I was starting to understand why the woman earlier had been so frustrated with me. Conversations about this situation seemed to naturally devolve into logic loops. "Could I see the easement agreement that allows the HOA to build trails on my property?" I asked. "There's no easement agreement because this isn't your property." "Could I see documentation of the community's ownership of this property?" "The ownership is established by the fact that community facilities are installed here. But the community facilities were installed without my permission, on my property. They couldn't be installed on your property because that would be illegal." "Right. So this must be community property?" "Wrong." The second man pulled out a folder and flipped through several pages. "According to our community map, this area is designated as Community Green Space, Trail Segment 7. That designation comes directly from the board-approved master plan." "When was this master plan approved?" 3 years ago. "Was I notified about this master plan?" "All residents receive notification of board meetings and planning sessions." "I'm not a resident of your community. I'm not part of your HOA. Everyone in the zip code is part of the community association." "No, they're not." "Yes, they are. That's how community associations work." "No, it's not." We had officially reached peak circular logic. The clipboard man looked genuinely frustrated, like I was being deliberately obtuse about something obvious. "Look, sir, I don't know what your issue is with the trail system, but you can't prevent community members from using community facilities. If you have a specific complaint about noise or foot traffic, you can file a formal grievance through the proper channels. My complaint is that you've built a trail through my backyard without permission." "This isn't your backyard." "Yes, it is." "No, it's not." The second man stepped in before we could continue this productive exchange. "Sir, are you claiming that you have a deed to this property?" "I'm not claiming I have a deed, I do have a deed." "Could we see this alleged deed?" "You could see my actual deed if you'd like." That won't be necessary, the clipboard man said quickly. We're not here to authenticate property documents. We're here to address the disruption of community activities. But if I could prove that I own this property, that would resolve the issue, right? It wouldn't prove anything because this is obviously community property. Obviously. Look at the trail markers. Look at the reflection area. Look at the informational signage. Community associations don't install amenities on private property. You keep saying that because it's true. Then how do you explain the amenities being on my private property? They're not on your private property, but they are. But they can't be. This conversation could have continued indefinitely, but fortunately my neighbor from across the street wandered over to see what was happening. "Hey there," he called out. "Everything okay?" The clipboard man turned to him with obvious relief. "Sir, are you a community resident?" "I live right over there," my neighbor said, pointing to his house. "I've been watching this whole situation develop. Could you confirm for this gentleman that this area is community green space?" My neighbor looked around at the trail markers and the reflection bench, then back at my house. "Well, that's an interesting question," he said slowly. "This is definitely his property, but it looks like someone built a trail through it." The silence that followed was almost beautiful. The clipboard man stared at my neighbor like he had just announced that gravity was optional. "That's not possible," he said finally. "I mean, I've lived here for 20 years, my neighbor continued. His house was here when they started building the rest of the neighborhood. It was definitely here first. But this is designated community green space. Maybe someone made a mistake with the designations. Community boards don't make mistakes about property ownership." My neighbor shrugged. "Seems like they might have this time." The second man flipped through his folder again, more urgently this time. "Our records show this entire area as community property," he said. "Your records might be wrong," my neighbor suggested helpfully. "Our records aren't wrong. Then how do you explain the situation?" The clipboard man looked back and forth between my neighbor, me, the trail markers, my house, and his clipboard. You could almost see the gears grinding as he tried to process information that didn't fit his understanding of how things worked. "We'll need to research this further," he said finally. "That sounds like a good idea," I agreed. "In the meantime, community activities will continue as scheduled." Will they? Community members have the right to use community facilities, even if the facilities were built illegally on private property? The facilities weren't built illegally. How do you know? Because that would be illegal. And we were back to circular reasoning. The two men left, promising to research the situation and follow up through proper channels. My neighbor and I watched them drive away. "That was entertaining," he said. "Frustrating is more like it. You know they're not going to stop, right? The HOA board is going to dig in on this. They can't admit they made a mistake this big. What do you think I should do? Get a lawyer and a surveyor? Document everything. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." He was right, of course, but I was getting tired of being reasonable about an unreasonable situation. These people had built a trail through my backyard, installed a bench 20 feet from my house, and were now treating me like a delusional troublemaker for objecting to it. Monday morning, I called a licensed surveyor and a real estate attorney. The surveyor could come out Wednesday, and the attorney could meet with me Friday. In the meantime, I decided to do some research of my own. The county records office had everything online. My deed was clear and unambiguous. I owned 2.3 acres, with boundaries that definitely included the area where the trail had been built. The property had been mine since 2012, purchased from the estate of the original farmer. More interesting was the HOA's filing history. When they'd incorporated as a homeowners association, they had indeed claimed ownership of certain green spaces and community areas for tax purposes. Community green space qualified for property tax reductions, which could save a large development significant money each year. According to their own documents, the HOA claimed ownership of approximately 15 acres of undeveloped green space throughout the community. This land was described as donated by community members for the purpose of maintaining natural areas and providing recreational opportunities. The problem was that my 2.3 acres was apparently included in that 15 acres of donated community green space. I had definitely never donated my land to the HOA. I'd never even spoken to anyone from the HOA until Saturday morning when they started hammering stakes into my lawn. But according to their tax filings, my property had been officially designated as community green space for the past 3 years. They'd been getting tax breaks on land they didn't own, while claiming that I had somehow donated it to them for community use. This was getting more interesting by the day. The next one is a malicious compliance story. To make an already long story as short as possible, some background. I am a manager for a North American railroad, and a lot of our work involves different crafts of employees. Different crafts have different unions and different work rules. The managers of the other crafts and I work together well to get done what we need to get done, especially when some of the work needs to get done at night. The track guys can have a crew assigned to nights while the signal guys can't. Even better, the signal guys who work overnight have to be let go after 12 hours, and if it's now their regular shift because they came in last night, they get paid the rest of the day to go home and sleep. Track guys have all 3 shifts, but we only have a day shift and an evening shift, but no night shift because the big hats don't want to hire enough people to do it. Now, the company has decided that paying guys to go home 2 hours early on a Thursday, come in and work overtime all night at 10 p.m., and go home at 10 a.m., getting another 4 hours pay to go home and sleep is the ending of all that is good and pure in the universe, and will eventually lead to the collapse of capitalism, the nation, and indeed the universe itself. So they decide that the second shift guys have to stay 4 extra hours, and the first shift guys have to come in 4 hours early. I point out that, 1. I can't force employees to work overtime unless it's an emergency, and the union isn't likely to agree that we want to do this at night so we don't affect traffic is an emergency. 2. Not all employees are qualified on the same things. 3. Since they took half of my trucks away 5 years ago, because savings, I don't have enough vehicles for an entire second crew to show up at 2 a.m. and relieve the guys working in the field so they can go home. The guys currently working will have to stop work, pack up the tools, drive back to the office, let the smaller relief crew load up, drive back out to the work site, do the starting paperwork and briefings, and begin the work. And most importantly, 4. That while we aren't there, the track guys can't work because we have to keep taking things off of the rail so the track guys can do their work, and then put them back when the guys are done so we can run the trains in the morning. All of it falls on deaf ears because the freckle-faced college kid, who opens every conversation with, "I have an MBA, damn it," who has somehow gotten to a position where he's in charge of the estimates, wants to complain about those 24 hours a night. So, after having gone on the meeting record for all of it, I get out of the kid's way. I decide that if my boss isn't going to have my back, I'm not going to stop this inevitable disaster. After all, I have only been doing this for 27 years, but he graduated with a 3.6 GPA from UTEP, so he must know better. So the first night, the job grinds to a halt like clockwork at 1 a.m. The second crew shows up at about 4:15, and they get to work. The track folks pack it in because by the time anything gets dismantled, there won't be enough time to get anything done and put it all back together to start moving trains by 7. Second night, the shift change was a little smoother, so they got out there at 3:45. Managed to get a little work done before packing up. Third and fourth night it rained really hard, so the drive back to the shop and out to the job site took extra time. No work done after the new crew showed up at 4:30. Bright and early Monday morning, we show up at our morning meeting to find that the track guys got about 30% of the work done that they'd planned for the week, and at this pace would finish a 6-week job more than 15 weeks behind and over budget by more than 300%. Mr. MBA proceeds to launch into his carefully rehearsed speech about key metrics, percent spent versus percent complete, and all sorts of other nonsense. Then he decides to start in on me. Since I obviously conspired and colluded with my employees to egregiously erode progress for an entire week. I held up the meeting minutes from the previous week, told him in no uncertain terms that he had asked, in fact demanded, that we have a full shift change in the middle of the track department's work. I looked across the table at him and asked him if he wanted to revise that position. Completely unwilling to let this lowly engineer tell him what to do, he said no, and I was supposed to somehow magically make the shift change faster. Next 3 weeks were the same story. They've now been out there for a month and have managed to accomplish just shy of a week and a half of work. Mr. MBA shows up on the site one night just in time to watch my night guys walk off, watch the track guys shut down the machines and gather outside to smoke, hang out, and generally carouse because they know they now have 3 hours to screw off and be paid for it. My guys had called me when Mr. MBA showed up, so I get out of bed and get to the job site just in time to see this guy in his shiny, fresh from the package safety gear screaming at the top of his lungs to the guys to get back in their equipment and get the back to work. They all refuse because they all know that they can't work without us there. Not that they care all that much about our equipment, but because they know Mr. MBA has been throwing a little too much weight around, and nothing makes union employees stick together better or faster than putting the screws to a manager who really needs it. I walk up during a profanity-laced tirade and cut right in and say, "Well, Mr. MBA, I'm sure you're not suggesting that these qualified employees violate Rule 300, which clearly states that they shall not, under any circumstances, run that equipment through a switch that the signal department hasn't checked, would you? That would be a serious violation, and could get him a 30-day suspension without pay. And if you were to suggest that he do that, you wouldn't have a union card in your pocket, and he would have 30 witnesses that saw you give him that directive. So you wouldn't be suggesting that, would you?" He turned 3 shades of purple, stomped back to his little white company sedan, and drove away. He held on to his asinine mid-shift shift change for another 2 weeks until he couldn't hide the massive production delays from his boss anymore, and suddenly he wasn't in charge of the estimates anymore. The total cost of his little venture, just over $940,000 over the course of 6 weeks, but he did manage to save $700 a night on those off hours that he didn't have to pay for. The next one is an entitled people story. I remember this like it was yesterday. May end up longer than I expect with typos because I just woke up. Sorry in advance. Anywho, I did all my due diligence to have my son's 5th birthday party under shaded benches at a public park. These are first come first serve but can also be rented. I wanted to do a bouncy castle too and had to get a city permit to allow it. I reserved my 2 rows of benches under the 6-row awning and got there at 6 a.m. to make sure I got an end row for easier access cause kids party and secured my 2 rows of tables. Another guy came setting up for his 1-year-old birthday and starts putting up ribbon and balloons and tablecloths on the 2 tables behind me. This guy then asked me if I could watch his stuff real quick while he goes to the store for ice or something. He forgot, I don't remember exactly, but I say sure. I got nothing other to do while I sit at the park and wait till noon for the party to start. I did have my son with me because he wanted to come and play at the park and run around while we waited. This is important for the next part here. So next thing I know, my son is hysterically crying running towards me. I'm freaking out cause of his screams of terror. So a lady with her infant and toddler were at the playground and she had a puppy on leash. My son was running to the swings and the dog was able to lunge out and bite him on the arm. He had a good puncture wound. So first I assess him, he's okay, then go to find said dog cause WTF, why bring aggressive dog to park with kids running around? She never bothered to come to me either, I had to go to her and she was rushing to leave. It was a puppy, he had his shots ECT. I was pissed, but her apologies and look of remorse led me to move on. His wound wasn't worth a doctor trip, it was minor and she actually had shot records and we exchanged numbers, so I let it go. Thought that's the worst that will happen today. I was so very wrong. So me and my boy go back to the tables, and this new lady, we will call her EL, has arrived and was ripping all the decorations off the tables. The guy asked me to watch. I confront her and she says she reserved the tables and we all have to move. I let her know I too reserved tables and only 2 rows can be reserved and any that aren't are first come first serve, and that guy was here, just went to grab something. With all the chaos of my son's ordeal that was around the time the guy got back, I apologized for EL and his decorations he's pulling out of the trash. She's pissed because she thought she got all 6 rows of tables. The insults start flying at this guy from her and the small group that showed up with her. I actually showed her the spot on our permits where it states 2 tables. She's pissed but kinda lets it go. That is until the bounce house guy gets there to set up. EL comes stomping over to me. You can't have that here. Me, yes you can, you just have to get a city permit, which I did. EL, no, I called the park. They said you can't. Me, yes you can. It even on their website, you have to get a city permit, which was like $100 to be able to set one up. And I did that. She wanted to see said permit, but was being very rude from the get-go, so I said, I don't have to prove crap to you, lady. Now, parties are in full swing and she keeps trying to send her kids to our bouncy house. I tell her sorry, but I can't permit that. If one of your kids gets hurt, I would be liable, so hard pass. I didn't, but should have mentioned. If she wasn't a total idiot to everyone, maybe it would be a different story. Anyhow, this makes her over the top mad, and EL and her group starts hurling insults and racial slurs towards the middle table. She was more mad at me, I think, but they were closer, so they got her rage. Anywho, EL and her entitled man get really nasty, and next thing I know, there is a full-blown fistfight between EL's baby shower group and a 1-year-old birthday party group. The groups weren't going at it, pretty sure it was the husbands, but still. Cops are called, kids are scared. I walk over and said I'd give a statement to police as the guy next to us didn't start it and did. Surprisingly, no one went to jail. Of course, EL had police come check I had proper permits, and when all my stuff stayed because it was all legal, she finally backed down and no more insults. But damn, the death stares I got from any of her group the whole time was crazy. So it was both a party from hell and one we will never forget. Thanks for reading. We all laugh about his crazy party now he's 19. Anyway, thank you for watching.